Alright, so here we go with OPM 105, written this day, May the 29th. It's a cliche, but it really is crazy how fast time moves. In fact, the commentary that I make today addresses this. That is to say, we all know about the relativity of time. So it's, and as Heidegger showed us, time is both the speed, the way that we move, and in terms of how fast or slow, but the quality of that movement. So in these meditations, and I do try to not just write about stuff, but the whole point of doing phenomenology is, in my estimation, is that you're giving an account of the old Gandhian idea that you try to be that which you are thinking about. Be the change you want to see in the world. So in my case, it's be the idea that you are writing about, or something like that. Anyway, please do check out the blog post that goes with this video. If you're just finding this on YouTube, check it out, because I do write about time. Yes, the days go by very quickly, and when we look at the calendar, we realize that yet another month, the 5th month of this year, is already about to conclude. But in that time, in those days, many things have happened. Our revisiting of Socrates in his jail cell has been delayed by our exploration of meditative thinking, the modality of intense listening, the practice of waiting. Like Socrates, who was seized and thereby compelled to make a delayed entry into the home of Agathon, we are seized and delayed in this exploration. We continue. The kind of meditative thinking we describe here prepares for the attunement with the horizon of beings that unfolds in the releasement into the open region. We are focusing on the preparatory action of waiting that conditions the sage to maintain steadfast openness, what we have from the onset called contemplation. The distinction we are offering conveys the location of the sage, the guide of the learning, as being with the twofold play. The meditative practice conserves and shelters the truth of concealment, for this exercise occurs in hiding, when the learner is withdrawn and in dialogue with himself. The essence of meditative practice is captured by Cato when he says, quote, "Never is he more active than when he does nothing. Never is he less alone than when he is by himself." Unquote. Meditative practice is distinct from contemplation, the modality of attunement and steadfast openness that captures the intense awareness identified in painstaking listening. Contemplation is the modality of speculation, of imaginative thinking, that springs from the encounter with beings, the interpretive engagement with the horizon, which we call the proper, quote, releasement toward things, die Gelassenheit zur den Dingen, a quote from Heidegger. Contemplation springs from the releasement toward things, the letting go of one's claim over beings upon language and on being. To contemplate is to will non-willing, to give oneself or submit oneself to the other. But to give oneself over to the other is to be so attuned to the other that one is akin to a mirror. To be a mirror is to be capable of reflecting. To reflect the other is to receive and return to them the saying they have offered. Painstaking listening is the essence of contemplation, captured in the medieval practice that we identified in the attunement achieved by Francis of Assisi. Bonaventure captured the activity of contemplation with the word speculatio, which retains the twofold modality of poetic dialogue, offering and reception, painstaking listening, and evocative speaking. Contemplation as speculatio has its roots in speculum, which denotes mirror. Quote, Bonaventure uses the word to mean reflection, speculation, contemplation, consideration, unquote. I believe that's from Ewart Cousins, professor of mine at Fordham, his introduction to Bonaventure. Contemplation denotes our engagement with the beings that appear in the world, but an engagement that identifies a heeding of the directive gathering of being. When we heed the appeal of language, we find ourselves involved in the creative act of building, of making. This creative making preserves the open region and conserves the region of poetic dwelling. When we heed this directive, with the activity of contemplation, we become reflective. This is the first way or the path we take when we, quote, consider things in themselves. From these, as from a vestige, we can rise to knowledge of the immense power, wisdom, and goodness of the Creator. I believe that's a quote from Bonaventure. In contemplation, we are reflective of being's processual unfolding. This is the essence of the conveyance offered in the sage's evocative speech. To convey is to bear the message, to point to the arrival of the ineffable. To be reflective is to be released into the attunement within the horizon of beings, and in this attunement traverse the path of mystery, the boundary of the boundless. Here we see this path as the way of contemplation that takes us before the ineffable. But we are brought before the ineffable and being released by the evocative saying of the first questions. When Bonaventure calls the first way, what Bonaventure calls the first way, we call originary questions. In the opening moments of this exploration, we described releasement as the turning around, the adjustment, tuning, toward attunement, toward the condition of learning. We said being released to attunement, or being reposed, happens with being reposed. The apprentice is released to learning when receiving the estranging appeal of language, and thereby reposed by the tidings of the gathering directive of being. Here we say attunement is the releasement towards things, submission to painstaking listening, and the renouncement of the claiming ego, the juridical voice. This is why, as we said earlier, the comportment of learning as Gelassenheit is described as the willing of non-willing. In the way we pose for a photograph, we are placed in the right position to be captured. Learning is the letting be of unconcealment. Here we understand why learning as the essence of our relationship with being is described as the contemplative activity of speculatio, the activity of reflection, speculum, that allows for the appearance of the other. To contemplate is to reflect the other, or to allow for the other to appear through painstaking listening. Thus, the preparatory activity of the sage involves a kind of meditative activity that prepares him for steadfast openness and the guiding of others in the work of painstaking listening. To guide others in this work is to organize them in the building of poetic dwelling. To guide the building of poetic dwelling is to orchestrate and conduct the performance of poetic dialogue. The one who is capable of such guiding is the one who has endured the reception of the ineffable. We call meditation that activity that awaits upon the arrival and therefore properly receives the ineffable. And that's how it ends. From this day, the 29th day of May, written originally 10 years ago and reread and commemorated this day, the 29th of May, 2014. Check out the blog, and also this is page, I believe it's 175 to 177 in Being and Learning, the book.